the morning that never came. At 6:12 a.m., the sun was supposed to rise. Across the region, alarms rang, coffee machines hummed to life, and early commuters stepped outside expecting the familiar pale glow of dawn. The sky should have been soft with color, faint blues, thin streaks of orange, the slow promise of another ordinary day. But nothing changed. The horizon remained sealed in darkness, not the gentle darkness that fades before morning, not heavy storm clouds rolling overhead, not the shadow of an eclipse sliding across the sky, just black. Streetlights stayed on as if confused, their sensors never detecting daylight. Porch lights flickered uselessly against the empty sky. Windows reflected only darkness back at those staring out from inside their homes. The world felt paused, frozen in the final second of night. At first, people assumed it was a mistake, a malfunction, a regional power failure, faulty weather data. Phones were checked, weather apps refreshed, news stations searched for explanations. Clear skies, no storms, no astronomical events, no warnings, yet the darkness did not move. Minutes stretched into an hour, then two. The sky showed no hint of color, no shift in brightness, no sign that morning was coming at all. The sun had not risen, and no one could explain why. Outside, something else felt wrong. Birds did not sing. The usual chorus of morning noise never arrived. Farms reported livestock refusing to leave their shelters. Dogs paced restlessly, whining at doors and windows. Even insects seemed absent, as if the air itself had emptied. People described the silence as heavy, not peaceful but oppressive. It pressed against the ears, against the skin, against the mind. The darkness didn't feel empty, it felt occupied. Flashlights were raised, beams cutting into the black. But instead of scattering naturally, the light seemed to vanish too quickly, swallowed after only a few meters. Headlights barely pushed back the dark. There was no reflection, no depth, only a flat, absorbing void. Some residents felt an unexpected unease, a creeping discomfort they couldn't name, a sense that the darkness was not simply the lack of light, but something with presence, something active, something watching. As confusion grew, fear followed. Social media filled with shaky videos of black skies filmed in what should have been daylight. Emergency lines lit up with anxious calls. People stood in doorways, unsure whether to leave their homes or stay inside. Without the sun, the sense of time itself began to weaken. Morning felt like midnight. The body's internal clock had nothing to anchor to. Children asked their parents when the sun would come back. Parents had no answer. By mid-morning, the realization settled in. This was not a delay. This was not weather. This was not normal. The world had entered a day without sunrise, and somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, a deeper thought quietly formed in the minds of those standing under that unmoving black sky. If the sun did not rise today, what else might fail tomorrow? Later, many who lived through those first hours would struggle to explain exactly what disturbed them the most. It wasn't just the darkness. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't even the fear. It was the feeling that the darkness itself was different, not passive, not empty, not natural. As one witness would later describe, darkness wasn't the absence of light, it was something else. And that was only the beginning. A normal night that never ended. The night began like any other. There were no warnings issued by meteorological agencies. No emergency alerts flashed across phones or televisions. No unusual solar activity was detected by observatories scanning the sky. Satellite feeds showed clear atmospheric conditions, stable cloud formations, and normal temperature patterns across the region. In every measurable way, it was an ordinary night. Cities dimmed their lights according to schedule. Residential neighborhoods fell quiet as windows went dark one by one. Highways thinned as late travelers reached their destinations. Security cameras blinked into night mode. Automated systems across hospitals, factories, and transportation networks adjusted seamlessly for darkness, just as they had thousands of times before. Nothing suggested that this night would refuse to end. At weather stations scattered across the countryside, instruments recorded stable pressure, low humidity, and minimal wind activity. Sky clarity indexes rated the atmosphere as near perfect for sunrise visibility. Astronomers tracking routine data saw no anomalies in the sun's trajectory, No disruptions in orbital calculations, no expected eclipses or solar obstructions. Mathematically, physically, predictably, dawn was inevitable. And yet, when the hour arrived, the sky did not change. The first subtle sign was not visual, it was behavioral. Farmers who woke early noticed that roosters never crowed. Barn animals remained clustered tightly in corners of their enclosures, refusing to move toward open doors. Horses stamped nervously, breathing faster than usual. Dairy cows resisted milking routines, pulling away from handlers with uncharacteristic agitation. Veterinarians would later note elevated heart rates, dilated pupils, and stress responses across multiple species, as if the animals were responding to a threat humans could not perceive. In residential areas, dogs began pacing long before sunrise. Some scratched at doors repeatedly, then retreated to dark corners of their homes. Others barked toward windows or empty hallways, reacting to nothing visible. Cats hid under furniture, ears flattened, eyes fixed on shadowed spaces. Wildlife cameras positioned along forest edges captured strange behavior as well. Deer avoided open clearings. Birds remained completely silent inside tree canopies. No morning flight patterns emerged. The natural clockwork of the ecosystem simply paused. Humans, however, noticed the darkness itself first. Early risers pulled back curtains expecting the soft gradient of dawn. Instead, they were met with an unchanged black sky. Porch lights still glowed. Street lamps remained illuminated. Motion sensors continued operating as if it were still midnight. Many assumed heavy cloud cover. Some blamed faulty lighting sensors. A few suspected power grid irregularities. But when flashlights were turned on, the assumptions began to unravel. Normally, artificial light scatters against moisture, dust, and surfaces, creating depth and reflection. But this darkness behaved differently. Light beams seemed to collapse inward, while fading abruptly after only a short distance. There was little bounce, little peripheral glow, almost no ambient diffusion. It felt as if the darkness was consuming the light rather than allowing it to travel. Drivers reported that headlights illuminated far less road than usual. Familiar landmarks appeared flattened, depth distorted, distances unreliable. Pedestrians described a strange sense of spatial compression, as if the world beyond a few meters simply ceased to exist. Security footage later reviewed by analysts showed reduced reflective response across surfaces, asphalt, glass, metal, all absorbing more light than expected under normal atmospheric conditions. The effect was subtle on camera, but pronounced in human perception. Meteorologists quickly began checking their instruments. Cloud radar showed minimal cloud mass. Infrared satellite imagery detected no thick atmospheric layers blocking solar radiation. Wind patterns remained stable. No volcanic ash, no wildfire smoke, no dust storms, no pollution spikes. Even high-altitude balloon sensors reported clear transmission zones. There was nothing physically between the region and the sun. Astronomical observatories cross-checked orbital data. The sun's position remained mathematically correct. No objects were detected along its projected path. No shadowing body could explain the blackout. Simply put, there was no mechanism for the darkness to exist. And yet it persisted. As minutes turned into hours, uncertainty deepened. Local news stations interrupted regular programming. Experts spoke carefully, avoiding speculation. Terms like localized atmospheric anomaly and sensor inconsistency were repeated, though none matched the data. People stepped outside to confirm what screens could not explain. Neighborhoods gathered quietly in streets illuminated by artificial lights that should have shut off hours earlier. Faces glowed pale under LEDs and sodium lamps. Above them stretched an unmoving black ceiling. No stars, no moon, no gradient, just uniform dark. The absence of celestial reference points disturbed many observers more than the lack of sunlight itself. Normally, even deep night reveals something. Scattered stars, thin clouds, subtle variations. This sky offered nothing. It felt blank, flat, almost artificial. Some described it as looking painted on. Others said it resembled an enormous curtain. Phone cameras struggled to capture meaningful detail. Auto exposure systems overcompensated, creating grainy noise or washed out black frames. Even professional camera equipment produced inconsistent results, with contrast behaving unpredictably. The darkness resisted documentation. Meanwhile, subtle physiological effects began emerging among the population. People reported mild dizziness, difficulty concentrating, and an odd sense of pressure behind the eyes. Headaches increased. Anxiety levels rose even among individuals who did not consciously feel afraid. The body, deprived of natural light cues, began releasing melatonin incorrectly, disrupting circadian rhythms within hours. But there was something else, something harder to measure. Many residents later described an instinctive discomfort that arrived without logical trigger, a quiet sense of being observed, a feeling that the space outside their homes was not empty, despite appearing so. Not everyone experienced it, but enough did to make the reports impossible to ignore. Emergency dispatch logs recorded an increase in vague calls. "I can't explain it. Something feels wrong outside. The dark feels heavy. My dog won't stop shaking and I don't know why." None of the calls reported visible threats. No intruders, no weather events, no accidents, only unease. Scientists monitoring radiation levels detected no spikes. Geomagnetic readings remained within normal ranges. Seismic sensors registered no unusual activity. The planet itself showed no sign of distress. Yet the region remained wrapped in an impossible night. As morning hours slipped away, businesses hesitated to open. Schools delayed schedules. Transportation systems adjusted cautiously. Without daylight, even simple decisions felt uncertain. Human psychology relies heavily on environmental light for orientation, safety assessment, and confidence. In its absence, hesitation spreads. People began watching their clocks more closely. Time felt distorted. Minutes stretched. The expectation of sunrise, a promise the brain has trusted since birth, had been broken. And once a fundamental certainty collapses, the mind begins questioning everything else. Was this localized? Was it spreading? Was it permanent? Could it happen again? At that moment, no one yet suspected that the darkness itself might not be passive. But quietly, beneath the scientific confusion and logistical uncertainty, a new question was forming, not spoken aloud, but felt. What if this darkness was not merely something that happened, but something that arrived, and the night, still unbroken, offered no answer? Time begins to break. Without sunlight, the human body loses its oldest reference point. For thousands of years, the rising and setting of the sun has regulated sleep, hunger, alertness, memory, and emotional stability. Long before clocks existed, light was the signal that told the nervous system when to wake, when to rest, when to prepare, when to relax. Now that signal was gone. At first, people tried to continue their routines. Alarms still rang. Digital clocks still displayed accurate time. Phones synchronized normally with network towers. Objectively, time had not changed. Subjectively, however, something was beginning to fracture. Morning felt like midnight. Noon felt indistinguishable from early dawn. Without shadows, without shifting light angles, without the subtle visual movement of the sky, the environment became static, frozen in a single visual state that never evolved. The brain expects change. When it doesn't arrive, perception begins to drift. Shops opened and closed inconsistently. Some employees arrived hours early, convinced it was later than it was. Others overslept, unable to judge whether they had rested enough. Schools canceled classes after students failed to arrive on time. Public transportation operated on reduced schedules because ridership became unpredictable. People checked their phones obsessively, searching for confirmation that time was still behaving normally. Many reported needing to verify the clock repeatedly, unable to trust their own internal sense of duration. Minutes stretched. Simple tasks felt longer than they should. Walking a familiar hallway felt extended, as if distance itself had subtly expanded. Conversations drifted strangely, with pauses that felt either too long or too short. Silence became uncomfortable, not because of what filled it, but because it felt unusually dense. Hospitals began noticing an increase in cognitive symptoms. Patients reported headaches, nausea, mild vertigo, and disorientation. Nurses described individuals asking the same questions repeatedly within short intervals, forgetting answers almost immediately. Memory recall slowed. Reaction times increased. Doctors initially suspected sleep deprivation, anxiety, or stress-induced dissociation, but then stranger reports began appearing. Several patients described moments where the room seemed to subtly lag behind their movement, as if reality itself needed an extra fraction of a second to catch up. Others reported fleeting sensations of motion while standing still, similar to the feeling of an elevator stopping or a ship gently swaying. A few claimed they experienced brief time gaps, not unconsciousness, not blackouts, just missing moments. A woman reported pouring a cup of coffee and suddenly finding it already empty without recalling drinking it. A man claimed he looked at his phone at 9:14 a.m., blinked, and saw 9:47 a.m., with no memory of the intervening half hour. Security cameras later confirmed that he had remained seated the entire time. He had not moved, yet time had passed. Psychologists documented these events as possible dissociative episodes caused by environmental stress. But the frequency and consistency of the reports raised concern. These were not isolated cases. Patterns were emerging across different age groups, professions, and locations. Something about the prolonged darkness was disrupting temporal perception at a neurological level. And perhaps more, as daylight failed to arrive, people began losing their sense of sequence. Normally, memory organizes itself around time, before and after, cause and effect, progression and outcome. Without environmental cues reinforcing this structure, memories began feeling compressed or blurred. Some residents struggled to remember whether certain conversations happened earlier that day or the day before, even though there had been no day at all. The darkness erased the boundary between moments. Several individuals described the sensation as living inside a single, continuous now that never refreshed. No morning reset, no evening closure, just ongoing continuity without psychological punctuation. This had emotional consequences. Anxiety increased, irritability rose, small frustrations escalated rapidly into conflict. The nervous system, unable to regulate properly without circadian signals, remained in a semi-alert state for too long. Cortisol levels climbed, sleep cycles fragmented. Some people slept excessively, drifting into long, heavy rest periods that offered little recovery. Others couldn't sleep at all, lying awake with racing thoughts and a vague sense of pressure in their chest or head. Dreams, when they occurred, became unusually vivid and unusually dark. Multiple residents independently reported dreams of endless corridors, sinking spaces, or rooms without windows. Some dreamed of walking toward distant light that never became closer. Others dreamed of being watched by something they could not see. The shared themes unsettled clinicians, but the most disturbing changes involved perception. Several individuals reported subtle distortions in how they experienced space and motion. Hallways felt slightly longer than remembered. Doorways seemed narrower or wider depending on the angle of approach. Peripheral vision occasionally produced faint movement that vanished when directly observed. At first, these were dismissed as stress responses. Then the auditory reports began. People claimed they could hear faint sounds in the darkness outside, sounds that could not be easily traced. Low-frequency hums, soft rhythmic pulses, distant vibrations that were felt more than heard, not loud enough to register clearly on audio equipment, not consistent enough to identify as machinery, wind, or electrical interference, but present. Some describe the sensation as standing near a massive object operating far underground, a deep, slow resonance that traveled through air, bone, and nervous system alike. Others described whisper-like textures embedded in the silence, not voices, not language, just the impression of layered sound, as if multiple frequencies were overlapping faintly beyond conscious hearing. Interestingly, animals reacted strongly to these periods. Dogs became restless during the hum-like sensations, whining or pressing close to their owners. Cats flattened their ears and stared toward windows or corners. Livestock shifted uneasily in enclosures, clustering tightly together. Wildlife cameras recorded sudden bursts of movement among nocturnal animals, followed by complete stillness, as if responding to intermittent signals. No known environmental sensors detected these phenomena reliably, yet the subjective reports continued. As hours passed without sunrise, the psychological weight increased. People began losing confidence in their own perception. When your senses no longer align with expectation, the brain struggles to maintain trust in reality. Individuals questioned whether their symptoms were imagined, induced by fear, or truly external. This uncertainty itself became destabilizing. Some residents became hypervigilant, scanning the darkness constantly for change. Others withdrew, closing curtains and avoiding windows entirely. A few became fixated on patterns, watching clocks obsessively, tracking minute changes in lighting that never arrived. One resident later described the experience as, "It felt like time was breathing differently, not moving forward the way it should, like the space between seconds was stretched wider." Another said, "I couldn't tell if 10 minutes passed or an hour. Everything felt thick, slow, like walking through invisible water." A third reported, "I kept expecting something to happen, a shift, a signal, anything, but the waiting itself became exhausting." Emergency services began receiving unusual calls, not reports of crime, not accidents, not medical emergencies, just confusion. "I feel disconnected from my body. My house feels unfamiliar, even though I've lived here for years. I keep forgetting what I was doing mid-action. I'm afraid to sleep because I don't know what time it is anymore." Psychological support lines were overwhelmed. Counselors attempted grounding techniques, breathing exercises, reassurance. But reassurance is difficult when the external environment itself refuses to normalize. As the darkness continued, collective stress created feedback loops. Anxiety amplified perceptual distortions. Distortions increased anxiety. Sleep deprivation worsened cognitive stability. Rumors spread through social media. Theories of solar collapse, dimensional events, experimental weapons, simulation errors. Information overload combined with sensory deprivation created fertile ground for fear. Yet beneath all speculation, a quieter realization began forming. Time itself, not measured time, but experienced time, was behaving differently. Not stopping, not reversing, but loosening. The structured flow humans rely upon was dissolving into something less predictable, less anchored. Moments felt detached from sequence. Memory felt slippery. Cause and effect felt delayed or blurred. It was as if the environment no longer reinforced the linear story the brain depends on to remain stable. Several neuroscientists later theorized that prolonged sensory monotony combined with disrupted circadian signaling can induce mild temporal dissociation, a condition where the brain struggles to integrate sensory input into a coherent timeline. But even they admitted the scale of the effect was unusual. The darkness was not simply removing light, it was removing reference. And without reference, perception begins to bend. Some residents began experiencing subtle emotional numbness, a flattening of affect. Joy felt muted, concern felt distant. Everything carried a slightly unreal quality, like watching life through thick glass. Others experienced the opposite, heightened emotional sensitivity. Small stimuli triggered strong reactions. Sounds felt sharper. Touch felt more intense. Thoughts spiraled faster. The nervous system, deprived of normal calibration, drifted toward extremes. By this point, many people were no longer asking when the sun would rise. They were asking what the darkness was doing to them. And perhaps more disturbingly, whether the changes would reverse when light returned. As the invisible hours continued slipping past, one unsettling thought grew quietly beneath the fatigue and confusion. If time could begin to fracture under darkness, what else might begin to bend? And somewhere beyond the sealed black sky, whatever had replaced daylight remained silent, offering no reassurance that reality would return unchanged. The behavior of the darkness. At some point, the question quietly changed. It was no longer simply, "Why hasn't the sun risen?" It became, "What exactly is this darkness doing?" Because the longer the region remained submerged in unnatural night, the more people began noticing patterns, subtle, inconsistent, difficult to measure, yet impossible to ignore. The darkness did not behave like ordinary absence of light. It behaved like something with structure. The first clues came from those who spent extended time outdoors. Utility workers sent to inspect lighting systems reported that visibility felt distorted in ways they could not explain. Depth perception collapsed beyond short distances. Familiar streets seemed unfamiliar, as if scale itself had been altered slightly. Objects appeared flatter, their edges softer, their boundaries less certain. Several workers described a strange visual phenomenon. When standing still, the darkness felt stable, but when they moved, it felt as if the environment resisted them slightly, like walking through invisible density, not physical resistance, more like perceptual drag. A few reported mild nausea after prolonged exposure. Flashlight testing became widespread. Residents and emergency crews pointed beams into alleys, open fields, and empty streets, trying to understand how light interacted with the darkness. The results were unsettling. Normally, light diffuses through air, reflecting off particles, surfaces, moisture, and dust. Even in deep night, there is always some ambient bounce, some glow, some soft gradient. Here, the beam edges collapsed sharply. Light faded abruptly instead of gradually. The illuminated zone felt unnaturally narrow, as if the darkness was compressing it. Some people compared it to shining a flashlight into thick velvet. Others said it felt like the beam was being swallowed rather than traveling. Photometric measurements later confirmed reduced scatter and abnormal absorption rates, though not enough to fully explain the extreme subjective experience. The darkness seemed to drink light. Thermal imaging provided another anomaly. Several private security firms and emergency services deployed thermal cameras expecting to see normal heat signatures of buildings, vehicles, and human movement. While these were visible, the surrounding environment showed irregular cold pockets drifting slowly across open spaces, not wind-driven, not convection patterns, not mechanical airflow. The cold zones moved slowly and smoothly, sometimes intersecting with structures without disruption, like overlapping layers. When people walked through these cold pockets, many reported brief chills, tingling sensations on exposed skin, and a faint pressure in the chest or ears, similar to rapid altitude changes, though far weaker. Environmental sensors could not explain the pattern. Air temperature remained stable. Humidity remained normal. Barometric pressure showed no unusual gradients, yet the cold pockets persisted. Security cameras added further confusion. Reviewing footage revealed faint distortions in shadow behavior. Some shadows shifted without corresponding movement of any object. Others elongated briefly before snapping back to normal proportions. In a few cases, faint flickering artifacts appeared where no light source fluctuation existed. Analysts initially blamed compression errors, sensor noise, or software glitches. But when the same artifacts appeared across multiple independent camera systems using different hardware and software, the explanation became less convincing. One technician described it simply: "It looks like the darkness is moving, not like smoke or fog, but like something adjusting itself." Still, nothing definitive could be proven. The darkness resisted measurement. LiDAR scans failed to reveal particulate density increases. Air sampling showed no unusual chemical composition. Radiation levels remained normal. Electromagnetic sensors detected no major interference patterns. Every traditional explanation collapsed under scrutiny. It wasn't weather. It wasn't pollution. It wasn't atmospheric debris. It wasn't astronomical obstruction. It wasn't electrical failure. The darkness existed without a clear physical mechanism. As equipment failed to provide clarity, human perception became the primary sensor, and perception told a disturbing story. Many residents independently described the same vague sensation. The darkness felt close, not visually closer, spatially closer, as if the empty space beyond visible distance was somehow compressed inward. Standing outdoors gave some people the impression that the world ended just beyond their flashlight beam. That beyond that thin ring of light was not empty space, but something dense and present. Several compared it to standing near deep water at night, unable to see what lies beneath the surface, yet acutely aware of its depth. This sensation intensified in open areas such as parking lots, fields, and highways where the absence of visible boundaries amplified the effect. A few individuals reported brief moments of spatial distortion, feeling taller or shorter than normal, or perceiving nearby objects as slightly misaligned relative to their memory. These distortions were fleeting but unsettling. Auditory perception continued evolving as well. The faint low-frequency hum reported earlier became more noticeable during quiet periods. Some people claimed it intensified slightly during the cold pocket movements, though no instrument correlation could confirm this reliably. The hum was not constant. It pulsed slowly, irregularly, sometimes fading completely for long intervals before returning. Those sensitive to low-frequency vibration described it as resonating through the body rather than entering through the ears, a pressure sensation in the chest, jaw, or sinuses. Several residents developed mild headaches that coincided with these periods. Again, no external source could be identified. More disturbing were reports of directional awareness. Some individuals felt that certain areas of darkness felt heavier than others. Specific alleys, tree lines, or stretches of road triggered stronger discomfort without visual cause. People avoided these areas instinctively, unable to explain why. Animals reacted even more strongly. Dogs refused to approach certain dark zones, pulling against leashes or freezing in place. Livestock avoided particular corners of barns or pastures, clustering away from invisible boundaries. Birds remained absent entirely, refusing to emerge even when artificial lighting was increased. Wildlife cameras showed animals diverting paths abruptly, as if encountering invisible barriers. The darkness seemed to have topology, not visible geography, but behavioral geography, as if some areas contained more of it than others. Emergency services logged several incidents where individuals reported feeling sudden waves of panic when crossing specific locations, only to feel relief after moving a short distance away. No environmental triggers could be identified. Psychologists debated whether these reactions were psychosomatic, fueled by collective anxiety and expectation. But the consistency of location-based reactions raised doubts. Perhaps the most unsettling reports came from those who remained still for extended periods in darkness. Several individuals described a sensation of being subtly observed, not visually, but spatially. A sense of orientation toward them, like standing near someone in a dark room without seeing them. This sensation was often accompanied by heightened alertness, increased heart rate, and a sudden urge to move or retreat indoors. No one reported seeing anything, but many reported feeling something. One resident later described, "It wasn't fear exactly. It was like awareness, like the space around me was paying attention." Another said, "The dark felt crowded, even though I knew nothing was there." A third reported, "When I stood still long enough, the silence felt like it was leaning toward me." Such descriptions defied scientific framing, yet they appeared repeatedly in independent interviews. As if human nervous systems were detecting something below conscious resolution. Attempts to artificially flood areas with light produced inconsistent results. High-powered floodlights illuminated larger zones than flashlights, but the edges still collapsed sharply. The darkness beyond the illuminated perimeter felt even more pronounced by contrast, creating a stark boundary effect, a visible frontier between light and something else. Some describe the boundary as feeling thick, like the edge of fog, even though no particulate matter was present. Light did not gradually blend into darkness. It terminated. Engineers attempted spectrum testing to determine whether certain wavelengths penetrated further than others. Results showed marginal variation but no meaningful breakthrough. Infrared, ultraviolet, visible, all were absorbed unusually quickly compared to baseline expectations. The darkness was broadband resistant. The absence of any scattering medium baffled physicists consulted remotely. There was simply nothing in the air to explain this behavior, which raised an uncomfortable possibility. If the darkness was not a physical medium, then what was interacting with the light? As hours continued passing without sunrise, the sense of abnormality deepened. People stopped describing the darkness as dark and began referring to it as it. It feels closer tonight. It's thicker near the highway. It doesn't like the lights. Language shifted subtly, reflecting instinctive personification, not necessarily belief, but psychological framing. Humans naturally assign agency to unexplained patterns, but sometimes agency is the only model that fits observed behavior. The darkness demonstrated consistency. It absorbed light aggressively. It altered perception subtly. It produced irregular thermal and auditory anomalies. It influenced animal behavior strongly. It created location-based psychological responses. It resisted measurement. It lacked known physical mechanisms. And it remained perfectly silent. No dramatic manifestations, no visible shapes, no overt motion, just persistent structured wrongness. Some scientists theorized exotic atmospheric plasma fields, unknown photonic absorption phenomena, or rare quantum-scale interactions amplified by environmental conditions. Others quietly admitted they had no working model at all. Meanwhile, residents adapted in small ways. People avoided open areas. They kept lights on constantly. They moved in groups when possible. They minimized time outdoors, not because they had evidence of danger, but because instinct demanded caution. The darkness felt active, even if it did nothing. And sometimes, the absence of action is more unnerving than overt threat. By this stage, the community no longer waited for sunrise with casual curiosity. They waited with tension, with vigilance, with a growing sense that whatever had replaced daylight was not simply a broken system, but a presence occupying the sky, a presence whose intentions, if any, remained unknown. And beneath the growing unease, one quiet question lingered in many minds. If the darkness could behave, could it also respond? Psychological collapse. Fear rarely arrives all at once. It seeps in quietly, through uncertainty, through exhaustion, through the slow erosion of normal reference points. By the time people realize they are afraid, the fear has often already rearranged their thinking, their behavior, and their sense of safety. By the second half of the endless night, the region was no longer merely confused. It was unraveling. Sleep deprivation became widespread. Without sunrise or sunset, circadian rhythms collapsed completely. Some residents slept in long, heavy blocks of unconsciousness that offered little restoration. Others remained awake for nearly 20 hours straight, unable to shut down their nervous systems. Insomnia amplified everything. Small worries grew into fixation. Harmless noises became threatening. Shadows felt closer, heavier, more invasive. The brain, deprived of rest and natural light, began misfiring emotionally and cognitively. Hospitals reported a sharp rise in anxiety attacks, dissociative episodes, and stress-induced hallucinations. Emergency rooms filled with people experiencing chest tightness, trembling, nausea, vertigo, and panic that mimicked serious medical conditions. Doctors reassured patients repeatedly heart rhythms were stable, oxygen levels were normal, neurological exams showed no clear pathology. Yet the symptoms felt real, because fear was real. Psychologists noted increasing reports of derealization, the sensation that the world feels unreal, artificial, or dreamlike. Patients described feeling detached from their surroundings, as if viewing life through glass or watching themselves from outside their own bodies. Others experienced depersonalization, a weakening sense of identity and emotional connection. Familiar faces felt strangely distant. Homes felt unfamiliar. Memories felt thin and unreliable. The prolonged darkness was dissolving the psychological glue that holds reality together. But perhaps the most dangerous effect was not individual distress, it was collective behavior. When uncertainty spreads across an entire population simultaneously, fear becomes contagious. Rumors multiplied rapidly. Some claimed the sun had permanently failed. Others believed the darkness was spreading beyond the region. Online forums speculated about experimental weapons, artificial skies, simulation breakdowns, or dimensional interference. A few religious groups interpreted the event as divine judgment or apocalyptic prophecy. Prayer gatherings formed in darkened buildings illuminated by candles and phone lights. Sermons warned of repentance, testing, or purification. Others adopted fatalistic beliefs that nothing could be done, that the world had already changed irreversibly. Fear seeks meaning. If no explanation exists, the mind invents one. Social media accelerated emotional feedback loops. Videos of black skies circulated globally, often accompanied by exaggerated claims or fabricated context. Each new rumor amplified uncertainty. Each anxious post triggered dozens more. People stopped trusting official statements. Authorities insisted the event was localized and under investigation, but without visible progress, reassurance lost credibility. Trust eroded quickly. As night continued, people began changing their behavior in ways that reflected deep psychological stress. Some residents refused to leave their homes entirely. Curtains were closed permanently. Lights remained on continuously, creating artificial bubbles of safety. Families slept together in single rooms, clinging to proximity as reassurance. Others did the opposite, wandering restlessly through streets, unable to tolerate enclosed spaces. They paced, drove aimlessly, or stood under streetlights for hours, seeking external grounding. Several individuals became obsessive about controlling small variables, repeatedly checking locks, arranging objects symmetrically, monitoring clocks compulsively, cleaning excessively. These behaviors provided temporary illusion of stability in a destabilized environment. A few cases escalated into paranoia. One man barricaded his doors and windows with furniture, convinced something was trying to enter from outside. A woman refused to drink tap water, believing it had been contaminated by the darkness. Another resident insisted the darkness was communicating through electronic interference, decoding random noise as messages. Mental health crisis lines were overwhelmed. Counselors worked continuously, offering grounding techniques, breathing exercises, reassurance, and emotional support. But even trained professionals struggled when the external environment itself remained abnormal. Reassurance depends on predictability. There was none. Children were particularly vulnerable. Without visual cues of day and night, their sense of routine collapsed. Many became irritable, anxious, or withdrawn. Some cried frequently without clear cause. Others became unusually quiet and compliant, conserving emotional energy. Parents reported children asking unsettling questions. Did the sun die? Is the dark alive? Will we ever go outside again? Is the world broken? Some children began drawing pictures of dark shapes, enclosed spaces, or blocked skies. Several described imaginary presences outside windows or in corners of rooms, not necessarily frightening at first, but persistent. Psychologists later noted that children often express environmental stress symbolically when language fails. Animals mirrored the tension. Pets clung closely to owners or hid continuously. Livestock refused normal feeding patterns. Even animals accustomed to darkness displayed heightened agitation, suggesting that whatever environmental cues had changed were affecting nervous systems across species. The sense of shared vulnerability intensified human fear. Group dynamics shifted. Neighbors who previously interacted casually now clustered together anxiously, sharing rumors and speculating. Others isolated completely, avoiding contact with anyone. Mistrust surfaced. Accusations that information was being hidden, that certain people knew more than they admitted. In some areas, small conflicts broke out over resources, batteries, generators, lighting equipment. Not because supplies were critically scarce, but because fear drove hoarding behavior. The darkness altered moral calculations. Short-term survival instincts began overriding long-term social cooperation. Emergency services faced rising tension. While no large-scale violence occurred, minor disputes escalated quickly into confrontations. Police noted heightened emotional volatility across routine calls. Psychologists refer to this state as collective stress response, when an entire community enters prolonged hyperarousal without resolution. But this event exceeded typical disaster models. There was no visible threat to fight, no clear danger to flee, no timeline for recovery. The enemy, if one existed, was invisible and undefined, which makes the nervous system restless and aggressive. More disturbing were the increasing reports of altered belief states. Several individuals claimed they felt the darkness responding emotionally, becoming heavier when people were afraid, lighter when people were calm. Others believed the darkness was feeding on attention, fear, or awareness. No evidence supported these claims. But belief itself can shape behavior powerfully. A small group attempted to conduct experiments, turning off lights simultaneously, standing silently outdoors, or trying to provoke changes in the darkness through coordinated actions. Results were inconclusive, but the behavior demonstrated how desperation drives people to seek control. Some individuals became convinced the darkness had intention, that it was watching, that it was waiting, that it was testing boundaries. Once such ideas take root, they spread easily through social reinforcement. Not everyone succumbed. Many residents remained grounded, relying on rational thinking, humor, and mutual support. Families played games, shared meals, tried to maintain routines artificially. Some communities organized shared lighting zones, public spaces where people could gather safely and feel less isolated. Human resilience persisted, but even the resilient felt the strain. Long exposure to environmental uncertainty slowly erodes emotional regulation. Patience thins, empathy fatigues. Small irritations feel magnified. Fatigue reduces cognitive filtering, allowing intrusive thoughts to surface more easily. The longer the darkness persisted, the more fragile mental stability became. Several clinicians later noted that if the event had continued even one more day, severe psychiatric breakdowns would likely have increased exponentially. The human mind can tolerate stress, but not ambiguity without endpoint. Perhaps the most haunting aspect was the emotional tone that settled over the region. Not pure terror, not panic, but something heavier, a quiet dread, a persistent sense of being suspended inside an unfinished moment, a feeling that reality itself was holding its breath. People reported feeling emotionally compressed, like being inside a sealed room with invisible pressure gradually increasing. Even laughter felt forced. Even conversation felt strained. Even distraction felt thin. The darkness was not attacking anyone directly, but it was reshaping how people thought, felt, and related to one another. And that may be the most powerful influence any environment can exert. As exhaustion deepened and nerves frayed, one question surfaced repeatedly in private thoughts and whispered conversations. If this is what one day of darkness can do to the human mind, what would a week do? A month? A year? And more quietly, more disturbingly, what if the darkness was learning us as we were learning it? As fear settled deeper into collective consciousness, the region waited, not just for light to return, but for sanity to hold. The sudden return. The return of light did not arrive like a sunrise. There was no gradual softening of the sky, no slow bleeding of color across the horizon, no gentle transition from night into morning. It happened instantly. One moment, the world remained sealed in unnatural darkness. Streetlights glowing, windows reflecting blackness, people moving cautiously through artificial light. The next moment, the sky was bright. Full daylight flooded the region without warning, as if a switch had been flipped somewhere beyond the atmosphere. Shadows snapped into place. Colors surged back into existence. The sky appeared clear and blue, completely normal, offering no hint that anything had been wrong moments earlier. For a brief instant, many people thought they were hallucinating. Eyes struggled to adjust, pupils constricted painfully. Some shielded their faces, overwhelmed by the sudden intensity. Others stood frozen, staring upward in disbelief, searching for clouds, distortions, or residual darkness. There was nothing. The sun shone exactly where it should have been. Animals reacted first. Dogs barked suddenly, then wagged uncertainly. Birds erupted into song almost simultaneously across neighborhoods, as if a delayed signal had finally been released. Livestock began moving again, cautiously at first, then more confidently. The natural world resumed its rhythm with startling speed. Humans followed more slowly. Doors opened. Curtains were pulled back. People stepped outside hesitantly, squinting against the brightness, scanning the sky and streets for any sign that the darkness might return. Neighbors looked at one another with exhausted relief. Some laughed nervously. Some cried openly. Several simply sat down on sidewalks or porches, overwhelmed by the emotional release. Emergency lines lit up again, not with panic, but with disbelief and relief. It's back! The sun is back! Everything looks normal. Authorities confirmed that all environmental instruments had returned to baseline readings. Atmospheric sensors reported no anomalies. Satellite feeds showed nothing unusual. Radiation levels remained stable. Temperature and pressure normalized instantly. No trace of the darkness remained. On paper, it was as if the event had never occurred. Hospitals treated a wave of light-induced headaches, eye strain, dehydration, and exhaustion. Doctors encouraged rest, hydration, and gradual readjustment to normal circadian cycles. Psychological relief was immediate, but incomplete. Many people remained hypervigilant for hours, expecting the light to disappear again without warning. Some kept lights on inside even during full daylight. Others avoided looking directly at the sky, as if afraid it might betray them. Sleep that followed was often deep but restless. Dreams remained vivid. Nightmares lingered. Some people woke abruptly, convinced the darkness had returned, only to find sunlight still streaming through windows. The nervous system does not reset as quickly as the environment. Over the following days, life gradually resumed. Businesses reopened. Schools restarted. Public transportation returned to normal schedules. News coverage shifted from live emergency reporting to analysis, speculation, and expert commentary. Official statements labeled the incident a rare localized atmospheric anomaly. No further explanation was provided. Scientists admitted privately that no existing model fully accounted for the observations. Data sets were incomplete, inconsistent, and difficult to interpret. Instrument logs showed contradictory readings depending on location and sensor type. The darkness left behind no measurable fingerprint, which unsettled many more than if evidence had remained. People wanted something tangible to blame: dust, clouds, magnetic storms, equipment failure, anything. Instead, they were left with absence. Psychologically, the after effects lingered. Sleep disorders remained elevated for weeks, anxiety levels increased. Some residents avoided dark spaces altogether, sleeping with lights on or keeping curtains open at night. A few reported panic responses triggered by power outages, tunnels, or heavily shaded areas. Several individuals sought therapy for lingering derealization and anxiety. Children continued asking questions that adults could not answer. Why did it go dark? Can it happen again? Where did the dark go? No one had honest answers. A few residents claimed subtle afterimages remained. Moments when lighting dimmed briefly, even when electrical systems remained stable. Instances where shadows seemed slightly too deep, slightly too sharp. Fleeting sensations of pressure in the air during quiet nights. No measurements confirmed these experiences, but the memories persisted. Some people avoided discussing the event entirely, eager to forget. Others became fixated, replaying every detail, searching for patterns or meaning. Online communities formed to compare experiences. Small discrepancies emerged. People remembered slightly different durations, slightly different sensations, slightly different timing. Memory itself seemed unstable around the event. One unsettling detail remained consistent across many testimonies. The return of light felt wrong, not because it was frightening, but because it was too perfect, too sudden, too complete, too clean. Reality rarely resets without residue. Several witnesses later described the moment as feeling less like dawn and more like a system reboot, a forced correction rather than a natural transition. As if something had been turned off, not finished, which raised a final unease beneath the relief. If whatever caused the darkness could stop, it could also start again. The sky offered no promise that it wouldn't, and although daylight returned, the sense of absolute trust in reality did not. The sun shone, the world functioned, life continued, but something subtle had shifted inside those who witnessed the endless night. They had learned that even the most fundamental constant, morning, could fail, and once a certainty breaks, it never fully repairs. The unanswered question. When the world returned to normal, the questions did not. Days passed, then weeks. News cycles moved on to other stories. Emergency briefings faded into archived footage. The black sky became memory rather than immediate threat. On the surface, life stabilized, shops reopened fully, traffic patterns normalized, schools resumed schedules, people returned to routines that once felt automatic. Sunlight streamed through windows again, warming sidewalks, casting predictable shadows, anchoring time in its familiar rhythm. But beneath the surface, something remained unresolved. Human beings are not designed to easily accept events without cause. We rely on explanations to preserve a sense of control, predictability, and meaning. When something violates fundamental expectations, like the sun failing to rise, the mind searches desperately for a framework to contain it. In this case, no framework arrived. The official explanation remained vague: a rare atmospheric anomaly, localized and unlikely to repeat. No technical details were offered publicly. No models were demonstrated. No mechanism was clearly defined. For many, that explanation felt insufficient. Not because people expected certainty, but because the experience itself felt too structured, too coherent, too consistent across witnesses to be dismissed as random error. The darkness had behaved. It had interacted with light. It had influenced perception. It had affected animals and humans differently. It had shown patterns without revealing mechanism. Random phenomena rarely exhibit such consistency. Private research groups attempted independent analysis. Some explored exotic plasma hypotheses, unknown photonic absorption fields, or rare atmospheric lensing effects. Others speculated about electromagnetic interference at scales not yet measurable. None produced conclusive models. The data itself was frustratingly incomplete. Many sensors behaved inconsistently. Some recordings appeared corrupted or inconclusive. Several camera feeds lost segments entirely during peak darkness. Timestamps conflicted slightly between systems. It was as if the event resisted being fully captured, which fueled deeper speculation. Online forums continued dissecting eyewitness accounts. Patterns were debated. Maps were drawn comparing reported cold pockets, sensory distortions, and psychological reactions. Amateur analysts attempted to triangulate behavior as if the darkness possessed geography. No consensus emerged, and gradually attention shifted from the darkness itself to its implications. If something could block or replace daylight without detectable physical obstruction, if perception and time could bend under environmental influence so subtly, if biological systems across species reacted in synchronized ways, then perhaps reality contained layers humans rarely notice, layers that normally remain dormant, masked by routine sensory input. The darkness may not have been an intruder. It may have been a condition, a state, something that exists continuously beneath normal perception, revealed only when specific thresholds are crossed. Several neuroscientists suggested that human perception filters far more than it reveals. The brain constructs reality from limited sensory data, ignoring massive amounts of information that fall outside survival relevance. Under unusual conditions, those filters may weaken. When light disappeared, perhaps more than visual input was lost. Perhaps the brain's interpretation system destabilized, allowing subtle environmental signals, normally suppressed, to leak into conscious awareness. That could explain the sensations of presence, spatial compression, altered time perception, and collective unease. But even this theory fails to explain the physical anomalies, light absorption behavior, thermal irregularities, sensor inconsistencies. The darkness was not purely psychological, which leaves a more unsettling possibility. Human understanding of environmental physics may be incomplete in ways we do not yet recognize. Not merely missing data, missing entire categories of phenomena. Throughout history, humanity has repeatedly discovered that reality is far stranger than previously imagined. Invisible radiation, quantum uncertainty, curved space-time, microbial worlds, dark matter, dark energy. Each discovery revealed that the universe contains vast structures and behaviors beyond direct perception. Perhaps the endless night was another brief glimpse into something normally hidden. Not necessarily hostile, not necessarily intelligent, but unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity triggers fear. For those who lived through the event, the unanswered question lingered quietly in everyday life. Some found themselves pausing occasionally in sunlight, feeling gratitude mixed with faint unease. Others became sensitive to darkness in ways they had never been before, avoiding unlit spaces or feeling mild anxiety when lights dimmed. A few developed a subtle hyper-awareness of environmental changes, listening more closely to silence, noticing shadow depth, paying attention to how light behaves in enclosed spaces. Not obsession, just awareness. As if part of the nervous system had learned something it could not unlearn. Some residents reported moments of déjà vu when standing under overcast skies, brief flashes of memory where the world felt momentarily too quiet, too flat, too still. Echoes of the endless night. These moments passed quickly, but they left traces. The most profound change may not have been fear. It may have been humility, a quiet recognition that even the most reliable constants, sunrise, daylight, time perception, are not guaranteed by any visible contract with reality. They simply persist until they don't. And once that truth is experienced firsthand, certainty becomes softer, more conditional. One resident summarized the experience years later in a simple sentence. "I used to think the world was stable. Now I think it's cooperative." Meaning, reality behaves consistently, but not necessarily permanently. The question remains open. Was the darkness a rare natural anomaly, a previously unknown atmospheric state, a neurological mass effect, a boundary condition in physical reality briefly exposed, or something else entirely? No evidence allows a definitive answer. And perhaps the most unsettling part is not the darkness itself, but the realization that humanity may lack the tools to recognize similar events if they occur again in different forms. The universe does not owe explanation. It only offers observation. The people who witnessed the day the sun did not rise carry a memory that cannot be fully validated or dismissed. It exists in personal testimony, fragmented data, and subtle psychological aftershocks. Not proof, not myth, something in between. And occasionally, when the sky darkens at dusk or storms roll in unexpectedly, a few of them still pause, just for a moment, listening to the silence, watching the shadows, feeling the air, waiting, not in fear, but in quiet awareness, because they know something most people never experience. Darkness is not always simply the absence of light. Sometimes it is something else.
Shadows